let's talk about changes in percentage points. Now, we have already talked a little bit about absolute and relative change. And so when we talk about percentage points, this is where we're talking about the absolute change between percents. So let's say this year I got a 1.3% raise and next year I got a 2.1% raise. What's the difference? Well, 2.1 minus 1.3 is 0.8, and I would say 0.8%, but that talks about relative change, right? Relative change is percents. So we would say there's a 0.8 percentage point increase, because if we are subtracting two numbers, we know that is absolute change. And so we talk about the absolute change between percents as percentage points. If then we would go one step further and divide to get a relative change, then we would talk about a relative increase to kind of show that this is relative change. So let's do some examples. According to the CDC, in 2014, the teen pregnancy rate was at its lowest ever, 2.42%. In 2013, the teen pregnancy rate was 2.66%. Find and interpret the absolute and relative change in the teen pregnancy rate from 2013 to 2014. Okay, so we know in 2013 the value was 2.66%, and in 2014 it was 2.42%. To find absolute change, we are taking the new minus the old, and 2014 is new, 2013 is old. So I'm going to take 2.42 minus 2.66, and that gives me a negative 0.24, and this is percentage points. Again, think about absolute change. Absolute change is the difference in the values. So it is absolutely a number, right? And so we talk about percentage points. Okay, now let's go on and talk about the relative change. Well, the relative change is the absolute change divided by the old value. So we're going to take our 0.24 percentage points and divide by our reference of 2.66. So this gives me a negative 0.090, or roughly negative 9%. So we would say there was a 9% relative decrease. And I say decrease because it's negative, right? It went down. So a relative decrease in teen pregnancy rates from 2013 to 2014. So you can just see when we talk about it in terms of a percent relative decrease, that tells us we're talking about relative change. And when we talk about absolute change, we use the words percentage points. Okay, let's do another one. Obesity has become an issue of global concern. The World Obesity Federation reports 37.9% of adult American men were obese in 2016. In South Africa, only 11% of men were identified as obese. Okay, part A. Compare South Africa's obesity rate to that of the U.S. using absolute change. Okay, so South Africa to U.S. So the U.S. is going to be the reference or the old value. So we're basically taking South Africa minus the U.S. Just thinking about what this means, right? Because absolute changes, new minus old. Okay, so South Africa is 11% and the U.S. is 37.9. So we would say negative 26.9 percentage points. So that comparison, we would say South Africa's obesity rate is 26.9 percentage points lower than U.S. for adult men. That's what that means. Part B, find and interpret the relative change comparing U.S. to South Africa. So now we're doing U.S. to South Africa. So South Africa is considered the reference or the old. So now we're taking U.S. minus South Africa. So we're going to take 37.9 minus 11, which we know is 26.9. And then we're going to take that 26.9 and divide by the reference of 11 to get 244.5%. Now, if we're going to interpret that, we would say the U.S. obesity rate for adult men is 244.5% higher than in South Africa. Because that's what it tells us. It's positive. That means it's higher. So the U.S. obesity rate for adult men is 244.5% higher than it is in South Africa. So you got to remember when you're comparing two things, so U.S. to South Africa, whatever we're comparing to is our reference. And whatever we're starting with, that's what we start our sentence with as well.